The black helicopter cut through the midnight darkness over the mountains of Afghanistan. Inside, 8 Navy SEALs sat in complete silence, their faces painted with camouflage, weapons secured tightly against their bodies. The only sound was the steady thrum of rotor blades slicing through the thin mountain air. Captain Marcus Rodriguez checked his watch one final time. 23 minutes until they reached the drop zone. He looked down the line of his team, each man focused and ready. These were some of the most elite soldiers in the world, handpicked for this critical mission deep in Taliban territory. The intelligence had been clear, but troubling. A high-value terrorist leader was hiding in a fortified compound nestled between 2 mountain peaks. Local sources reported he was planning a major attack on American forces within the week. The mission was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. Get in, capture or eliminate the target, and extract before enemy reinforcements arrived. Rodriguez had been leading SEAL operations for 12 years. His men trusted him completely, and he had never lost a soldier under his command. The team included his longtime friend and second-in-command, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, along with specialists in explosives, communications, medical support, and reconnaissance. Each man had completed hundreds of successful missions. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with cold calculation. He had studied every detail of the compound layout, memorized the patrol schedules, and planned 3 different extraction routes. Nothing had been left to chance. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to drop zone, Captain. Weather's holding steady, but there's a storm system moving in from the west. Could hit the area in 6 to 8 hours. Rodriguez acknowledged the warning. 6 hours would be plenty of time to complete the mission and reach the extraction point. The storm might even provide additional cover for their withdrawal. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. The SEALs moved out quickly, their boots silent on the hard ground. Within seconds, the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the team alone in hostile territory. Rodriguez checked his GPS and pointed toward a ridge line barely visible in the darkness. The compound lay 3 miles beyond that ridge, hidden in a valley that had been a Taliban stronghold for months. They had 4 hours to reach the target, complete the mission, and move to the extraction point. The team moved in perfect formation, covering ground quickly but carefully. Each man knew his role exactly. Morrison took point, his night vision scanning for enemy patrols. The communications specialist maintained contact with headquarters while the medic kept watch for any signs that they had been detected. After 2 hours of steady movement through increasingly difficult terrain, they reached the ridge overlooking the target valley. Rodriguez pulled out his binoculars and studied the compound below. It looked exactly as the intelligence reports had described, a cluster of stone buildings surrounded by a high wall, with guard towers at each corner. Through his scope, he could see at least 6 guards moving along the perimeter. Heat signatures from their thermal imaging revealed more personnel inside the main building. The target was definitely there. Rodriguez gathered his team for final instructions. They would approach from the east, where the wall was lowest. The explosives expert would breach the entrance while Morrison led the assault team. The communications specialist would maintain overwatch while Rodriguez coordinated the entire operation. Everything was proceeding according to plan when Morrison spotted movement on the far ridgeline. Through his scope, he could see the distinctive silhouettes of enemy fighters moving toward their position. Someone had detected their presence. "Captain, we've got company," Morrison whispered into his radio. "At least 12 hostiles approaching from the north ridge. They'll have us surrounded in 10 minutes. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation quickly. They could abort the mission and try to evade the enemy patrol, but that would mean losing their only chance to capture the high-value target. The terrorist leader would disappear again, and American lives would be lost in his planned attack. The decision was made in seconds. They would proceed with the mission despite the increased danger. Speed and surprise were now more critical than ever. "We go in fast and hard," Rodriguez told his team. "Complete the mission in 15 minutes and move to alternate extraction point Alpha. Command, be advised we have enemy contact and are proceeding with accelerated timeline." The response from headquarters was immediate but concerning. The extraction helicopter had mechanical problems and wouldn't be available for another 2 hours. The team would have to hold their position or find another way out of the mountains. Rodriguez felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. His men were depending on him to get them home safely, but the mission parameters had just changed dramatically. They were now operating behind enemy lines with no immediate extraction available and hostile forces closing in on their position. The storm clouds Morrison had mentioned earlier were beginning to gather overhead. In the distance, lightning flickered between the mountain peaks, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the rocky ground around them. The rain began falling harder as the SEAL team prepared for their assault on the compound. Rodriguez made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. They would proceed with the mission despite the approaching enemy forces and mechanical problems with their extraction helicopter. Morrison's team moved down the rocky slope toward the compound wall while Rodriguez maintained overwatch from the ridge. Through his night vision scope, he could see the enemy patrol getting closer to their original position. In 20 minutes, those fighters would discover the SEALs had been there. The explosives specialist, Sergeant Tommy Chun, reached the compound wall and began placing charges at the weakest point. His hands moved with practiced precision despite the increasing rainfall that was starting to affect visibility. The rain was both a blessing and a curse. It would muffle the sound of their breach, but also make movement more treacherous on the slick mountain rocks. Rodriguez watched through his scope as Chin finished placing the charges and moved to a safe distance. Morrison's assault team was positioned and ready. Everything was going according to plan when Rodriguez spotted something that made his blood run cold. 3 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters were racing up the mountain road toward the compound. Someone had alerted the terrorists that American forces were in the area. The element of surprise was completely gone, and his team was about to walk into a trap. Abort! Abort! Rodriguez spoke urgently into his radio. Multiple hostile vehicles approaching compound. We are compromised. But it was too late. Chen had already triggered the explosive charges, and the thunderous blast echoed across the valley. The wall crumbled, creating a gap large enough for the assault team to enter. Morrison and his men were already moving through the breach when the first pickup truck arrived at the compound's main gate. Rodriguez faced an impossible choice. He could order his men to retreat immediately, leaving them exposed to enemy fire as they climbed back up the rocky slope. Or he could support their assault and hope they could complete the mission before being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Continue mission, he decided. We finish this fast and extract through the North Canyon. The assault team moved through the compound with deadly efficiency. Morrison kicked down the door to the main building while his teammates provided covering fire. Inside, they found exactly what intelligence had predicted. The terrorist leader was meeting with several subordinates, planning their attack on American positions. The firefight was brief, but intense. The terrorists were caught completely off guard by the sudden assault. Within 3 minutes, the high-value target was secured and vital intelligence documents were gathered from throughout the building. But outside the compound, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy fighters from the pickup trucks had taken positions around the perimeter and were laying down heavy fire on the breach point. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least 20 different positions. Extraction point Alpha is compromised, Morrison reported over the radio. We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate support. Rodriguez was already moving down from his overwatch position, providing covering fire for his trapped teammates. But he knew the tactical situation was hopeless. They were outnumbered 4-1, with no air support available and no clear escape route. The storm that had been building all night finally broke with full force. Rain began falling in sheets, turning the rocky ground treacherous and reducing visibility to just a few yards. Lightning illuminated the compound in stark white flashes, followed by crashes of thunder that drowned out the sound of gunfire. Rodriguez reached the compound wall just as a rocket-propelled grenade exploded near the breach point. The blast threw him backward against the rocks, and he felt sharp pain in his left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through his body armor. Captain's hit. Morrison shouted over the radio. Captain Rodriguez is down. Rodriguez tried to respond, But his radio had been damaged in the explosion. Blood was running down his arm, and his vision was blurry from the concussion. He could hear his men calling for him, but the storm and ongoing firefight made communication impossible. Morrison made the decision to lead the team toward the North Canyon extraction point, believing Rodriguez was following behind them. In the chaos of the storm and firefight, none of the SEALs realized their captain had been separated from the group. Rodriguez struggled to his feet and tried to follow his team's route, but his injuries and the brutal storm conditions made progress almost impossible. He could see muzzle flashes in the distance, but couldn't tell if they were from his men or enemy fighters. As he stumbled through the darkness, Rodriguez realized he was lost. The familiar landmarks were invisible in the storm, and his GPS unit had been damaged in the explosion. Every step was agony, and he was losing blood steadily from his shoulder wound. 20 miles away, at a remote observation post high in the mountains, Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez heard the distant sound of gunfire echoing through the valleys. She had been stationed at the post for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on Taliban movement through the mountain passes. Vasquez was one of the most skilled snipers in the army, with confirmed kills from distances that seemed impossible to most soldiers. She had grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado and could read terrain and weather conditions like other people read books. Through her high-powered scope, she could see the muzzle flashes from the firefight near the compound. She immediately began trying to establish radio contact with any American forces in the area. Any American units. This is Overwatch 7. I have visual on heavy contact vicinity grid reference 4127. Request identification and status. The only response was static mixed with fragments of desperate radio calls. She could hear voices calling for their captain, reporting casualties, and requesting immediate extraction. It was clear that American soldiers were in serious trouble. Vasquez gathered her sniper rifle and equipment, making a decision that went against all standard operating procedures. She was supposed to maintain her observation post and report enemy movements to headquarters. But American soldiers were dying in the storm below, and she might be their only hope for survival. She began moving down the mountain toward the sound of gunfire, knowing she was walking into a situation where she would be outnumbered by dozens of enemy fighters. But Elena Vasquez had never abandoned a fellow soldier, and she wasn't about to start now. Captain Rodriguez dragged himself behind a large boulder as enemy bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him. The storm had intensified to the point where he could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Rain poured down his face, mixing with blood from a gash on his forehead. His left arm was useless, hanging limply at his side where the shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. Every breath sent waves of pain through his chest, suggesting broken ribs from the explosion. But worse than the physical injuries was the growing realization that he had lost contact with his team. Rodriguez tried his backup radio, but it produced only static. The storm was interfering with all communications, and his primary radio had been destroyed in the blast. He was alone in Taliban territory with no way to call for help, and no idea where his men had gone. 500 yards away, Lieutenant Morrison was leading the remaining 6 SEALs through the treacherous terrain toward the North Canyon extraction point. They had the high-value targets secured and were carrying vital intelligence, but they were still taking sporadic fire from pursuing enemy fighters. "Where's the captain?" Sergeant Chin asked during a brief halt behind some rocks. Morrison scanned the area behind them with his night vision scope. "He was right behind us when we left the compound. The storm must have separated us." The medic, Petty Officer Williams, shook his head grimly. That explosion near the breach was huge. If he was caught in it. "The captain's tough," Morrison said, though his voice betrayed his concern. "He'll find a way to the extraction point. Our job is to complete the mission and get this intelligence back to command." But privately, Morrison was deeply worried. Rodriguez had been injured in the blast. Morrison had seen him thrown backward against the rocks. In this storm, with enemy forces searching the area, an injured man alone had very little chance of survival. 3 miles away, Elena Vasquez was making her way down the mountain with the skill and patience that had made her legendary among Army snipers. She moved through the storm like a ghost, using every boulder and depression for cover as she approached the compound. Through brief breaks in the rain, she could see the compound burning in several places where explosions had started fires. Enemy fighters were moving through the area with flashlights, searching for the American soldiers who had attacked their stronghold. Vasquez found a position on a ridge overlooking the compound and set up her sniper rifle. From this vantage point, she could cover a wide area and provide support if any American forces were still in the vicinity. She began systematically scanning the terrain through her scope, looking for any sign of friendly forces. The night vision attachment on her rifle allowed her to see clearly despite the storm, and her years of experience helped her distinguish between enemy fighters and potential friendlies. After 20 minutes of careful observation, she spotted movement behind a large boulder about 800 yards from the compound. Through her scope, she could see a figure in American military gear, moving slowly and appearing to be injured. Vasquez immediately recognized the tactical situation. The lone soldier was trapped between two groups of enemy fighters who were systematically searching the area. In 10 minutes, they would find him. She lined up her first shot carefully, accounting for wind and rain. The nearest enemy fighter was moving toward the boulder where the American soldier was hiding. At 850 yards in a storm, it was an extremely difficult shot, but Elena Vasquez had made harder ones. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through her scope, she saw the enemy fighter drop instantly. The other Taliban fighters immediately began looking for the source of the shot, but they were searching in the wrong direction. Rodriguez heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered sniper rifle and saw one of his pursuers fall. For a moment, he thought rescue had arrived, but his radio was still dead and he had no way to communicate with whoever was providing support. Vasquez continued picking off enemy fighters with methodical precision. Each shot was perfectly placed, and the Taliban forces began to panic as their numbers dwindled. They had no idea where the shots were coming from, and the storm made it impossible to locate the sniper's position. After eliminating 6 enemy fighters, Vasquez saw her opportunity. The area around the injured American soldier was temporarily clear. She fired a flare into the air, a signal that American forces sometimes use to indicate a safe direction for movement. Rodriguez saw the red flare burst through the storm and understood immediately. Someone was directing him towards safety. He began moving in the direction indicated by the flare, though every step was agony with his injuries. Vasquez provided overwatch as the injured soldier moved slowly across the rocky terrain. She eliminated 2 more enemy fighters who tried to intercept him and guided him toward a more defensible position in a narrow canyon. Meanwhile, Morrison's team had reached the extraction point in the North Canyon, only to discover it was also compromised. Enemy forces had anticipated their movement and were waiting in ambush positions along the canyon walls. Extract point is hot, Morrison reported over the radio to any friendly forces who might be listening. We are taking heavy fire and cannot reach the landing zone. Captain Rodriguez is missing, presumed wounded. We need immediate support. The response came not from headquarters, but from an unexpected source. Elena Vasquez had been monitoring all radio frequencies and heard Morrison's desperate call. SEAL Team, this is Overwatch 7. I have your location and am moving to provide support. Can you identify your position with infrared strobe? Morrison activated his infrared beacon, visible only through night vision equipment. Overwatch 7, we have wounded and are low on ammunition. Enemy forces have us pinned down in the North Canyon. Roger that, Vasquez responded. I'm 2 clicks from your position. Hold fast and stay low. Help is coming. But Vasquez faced an impossible choice. She could move to support Morrison's team, who were under heavy fire and in immediate danger. Or she could continue helping the injured soldier she had been protecting, who was still alone and unable to defend himself effectively. The injured soldier was Captain Rodriguez, though she didn't know his identity. All she knew was that he was an American warrior who needed her help. But Morrison's team had 7 men who were also in mortal danger. As Elena Vasquez prepared to make the most difficult decision of her military career, the storm reached its peak intensity. Lightning crashed across the mountains continuously, and the rain fell so hard it was like standing under a waterfall. In the distance, she could hear the sound of more vehicles approaching. Taliban reinforcements were arriving from other compounds in the area. Soon, there would be more than 50 enemy fighters searching the mountains for the American soldiers. Rodriguez had taken shelter in a small cave, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Blood loss and exposure were taking their toll, and he was beginning to show signs of shock. Without medical attention soon, he might not survive the night. Vasquez looked through her scope at the lone figure huddled in the cave, then shifted to observe Morrison's team trapped in the canyon. Both groups of Americans desperately needed her help, but she was just one soldier with limited ammunition. The legendary sniper who had never failed a mission was about to face her greatest test. Elena Vasquez made her decision with the cold calculation that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions. She would help both groups of Americans, but she would have to move fast and use every skill she had learned in 8 years of special operations. First, she needed to get the injured soldier to a more defensible position where he could survive without immediate support. Then, she would move to assist Morrison's trap team. It was an almost impossible plan, but Elena Vasquez had built her reputation on accomplishing impossible missions. She fired another flare, this time pointing the injured soldier toward a cluster of rocks that would provide better cover and concealment. Rodriguez understood the signal and began moving again, though his strength was fading rapidly. Vasquez then began what she later called her lightning run, a high-speed movement across 2 miles of hostile terrain while providing covering fire for 2 separate groups of American soldiers. She eliminated 4 enemy fighters who were closing in on Rodriguez's new position, then immediately shifted her aim to the canyon where Morrison's team was trapped. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 15 enemy positions along the canyon walls. Her first shot took out a Taliban fighter who had been preparing to throw a grenade into the canyon where the SEALs were sheltering. The second and third shots eliminated 2 enemy fighters who had been setting up a machine gun position. "Overwatch 7, this is Morrison," came the voice over the radio. "We see your shots. You're hitting targets we can't even see from our position. Who are you?" "Just a friend," Vasquez replied as she lined up another shot. "Keep your heads down and be ready to move when I give the signal." For the next 30 minutes, Elena Vasquez fought a running battle across the mountains. She would eliminate enemy fighters threatening Rodriguez's position, then sprint hundreds of yards to a new firing position where she could support Morrison's team. The storm provided excellent concealment for her movements, but it also made every shot more difficult. She had to account for wind, rain, and lightning that could temporarily blind her night vision equipment. Rodriguez had managed to reach the rock formation Vasquez had indicated, but his condition was critical. He was drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss and shock. Through the storm, he could hear the crack of the sniper rifle that had been protecting him, but he had no idea who was providing the support. In his delirium, Rodriguez began to think he was being protected by some kind of guardian angel. The precision of the shots was beyond anything he had seen in 12 years of special operations. Whoever was behind that rifle was eliminating enemy fighters at distances and in conditions that seemed impossible. Morrison's team was finally able to move from their trap position when Vasquez eliminated the machine gun crew that had been pinning them down. They began working their way toward the alternate extraction point, with Vasquez providing overwatch from multiple positions. "Overwatch 7, we're moving toward extraction point Bravo," Morrison reported. "Can you maintain coverage?" "Affirmative," Vasquez replied, though she was running dangerously low on ammunition. She had started the night with 40 rounds for her sniper rifle and had already used 32 of them. As Morrison's team moved through the canyon, they passed close to Rodriguez's position without knowing he was there. The captain was hidden among the rocks, unconscious and barely breathing. Vasquez saw both groups through her scope and realized this was her chance to unite them. She fired a flare directly over Rodriguez's position, hoping Morrison would investigate. "SEAL team, check the rocks at your 2 o'clock position," she radioed. "You might find something interesting there." Morrison sent 2 men to investigate and was shocked when they found Captain Rodriguez barely alive among the rocks. "It's the captain," Williams shouted. "He's alive, but he needs immediate medical attention." The team medic immediately began treating Rodriguez's wounds while Morrison tried to understand how their captain had ended up in this location. The last time anyone had seen him, he was near the compound more than a mile away. Overwatch 7. We found our captain, Morrison reported. How did you know he was here? I've been watching over him for the past hour, Vasquez replied. Just like I've been watching over all of you. For the first time, Morrison began to understand the scope of what this mysterious sniper had accomplished. She had been protecting multiple groups of American soldiers simultaneously, fighting a running battle across miles of mountain terrain in the worst storm conditions imaginable. Who are you? Morrison asked. What unit are you with? Call sign Overwatch 7. That's all you need to know right now, Vasquez replied. We need to get you to the extraction point before more enemy forces arrive. Rodriguez regained consciousness as the medic worked on his wounds. His vision was blurry and he was confused about where he was, but he could hear familiar voices around him. Lieutenant Morrison, he whispered. Yes, sir, we've got you, Morrison replied. We're getting you out of here. How did you find me? Rodriguez asked. Morrison looked up at the storm-filled sky, where lightning continued to crash between the peaks. I think we had some help from above, Captain. As the SEALs prepared to move toward the extraction point with their wounded leader, Vasquez continued her protective overwatch. But she was down to her last few rounds of ammunition, and Taliban reinforcements were still arriving in the area. She could see vehicle lights moving along the mountain roads, and thermal imaging revealed at least 40 enemy fighters converging on the area where the Americans were located. The extraction helicopter was still 20 minutes away, and there was no way the SEAL team could hold off that many attackers. Elena Vasquez looked at her remaining ammunition, 5 rounds left. Then, she looked at the approaching enemy forces through her scope. 40 fighters against 8 wounded Americans, and 1 sniper with 5 bullets. She had never failed a mission in 8 years of special operations. But the mathematics of this situation seemed hopeless. Still, Elena Vasquez had not earned her legendary reputation by giving up when the odds looked impossible. She began planning what would become known as the most audacious sniper action in modern military history. 5 bullets, 40 enemies, and 8 American lives hanging in the balance. Elena Vasquez studied the tactical situation with the cold precision that had made her the most feared sniper in the United States Army. 40 Taliban fighters were converging on the SEAL team's position, and she had exactly 5 rounds left in her rifle. But Elena Vasquez hadn't survived 8 years of special operations by thinking conventionally. She identified the 3 vehicle-mounted machine guns that posed the greatest threat to the Americans, and the fuel truck that had just arrived with the Taliban reinforcements. Her plan was simple in concept, but required perfect execution under impossible conditions. She would use her remaining 5 bullets to create a chain reaction that would eliminate or scatter the majority of the enemy force. The first shot went to the fuel truck's gas tank from 900 yards away in driving range. The explosion lit up the mountainside like daylight and sent Taliban fighters scrambling for cover. The blast also took out the nearest machine gun crew and damaged 2 of the pickup trucks. Her second shot targeted the ammunition supplies in one of the remaining vehicles. Another massive explosion rocked the mountain, and chunks of burning metal rained down on the enemy positions. With her third bullet, Vasquez eliminated the leader of the Taliban force, a tall man with a radio who had been directing the search for the Americans. Without coordination, the enemy fighters began falling back in confusion. The fourth shot disabled the last vehicle-mounted machine gun by hitting the gunner at an extreme angle that most snipers wouldn't have attempted. The bullet ricocheted off a rock and struck the target, a shot that required intimate knowledge of bullet physics and ricochet patterns. Elena Vasquez had 1 bullet left and dozens of enemy fighters still in the area. She spotted a Taliban commander trying to rally his men behind a large boulder. At 1,100 yards in a thunderstorm, it was the most difficult shot of her career. She controlled her breathing, calculated wind drift and rain deflection, and slowly squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she saw the commander fall, and the remaining Taliban fighters finally broke and ran. Overwatch 7, this is Morrison, came the voice over the radio. I don't know what you just did, but the entire enemy force is withdrawing. You saved our lives. Vasquez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, but she knew the mission wasn't over. The SEAL team still needed to reach the extraction point, and Rodriguez required immediate medical attention. SEAL team, move to extraction point now, she ordered. I'll provide overwatch until you're airborne. Morrison's team carried Rodriguez toward the landing zone as the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder. The extraction bird was finally arriving, but it would be landing in a hot zone with enemy forces still in the area. Vasquez moved to a new position where she could cover the landing zone with her sidearm. Her sniper rifle was now empty. Through her scope, she watched the helicopter touch down in the small clearing as the SEALs rushed aboard with their wounded captain and captured intelligence. As the helicopter lifted off, Morrison grabbed the radio one last time. Overwatch 7, we owe you our lives. What's your name? How can we thank you? For a long moment, there was only static over the radio. Then, Elena Vasquez's voice came through clearly. Just doing my job. Get your captain to a hospital. The SEAL team flew toward the medical facility, still in shock over what they had witnessed. Rodriguez drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight, mumbling about an angel who had protected him through the storm. 3 days later, Rodriguez was recovering in a military hospital when Morrison visited with disturbing news. Captain, we've been trying to identify the sniper who saved us. There's no record of any unit designated Overwatch 7 operating in that area. Rodriguez struggled to sit up despite his injuries. What do you mean there's no record? Command has no idea who helped us, Morrison explained. The observation post where the shots came from was supposed to be abandoned. According to official records, no American personnel were stationed there. Rodriguez stared out the hospital window at the mountains in the distance. Someone was there, Lieutenant. Someone saved all our lives. Morrison nodded grimly. The ballistics team analyzed some of the bullet impacts. They said the shooting was beyond anything they'd seen before. Whoever that sniper was, they were operating at a skill level that's almost superhuman. 6 months later, Rodriguez had returned to full duty and was preparing for another deployment when he received an unexpected visitor. A woman in army dress uniform knocked on his office door. Captain Rodriguez? I'm Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez. I believe we've met before, though under different circumstances. Rodriguez looked at the slight woman standing in his doorway and immediately recognized something familiar about her eyes. They had the same calm intensity he remembered from that night in the mountains. You're Overwatch 7, he said quietly. Vasquez nodded. I was stationed at Observation Post Delta 7 that night. When I heard American forces in contact, I made the decision to provide support. Rodriguez stood and extended his hand. You saved 8 American lives that night. Why didn't you identify yourself sooner? I violated direct orders by leaving my post, Vasquez explained. I was supposed to maintain communications watch, not engage in combat operations. My commanding officer wasn't pleased when he found out. What happened to you? Rodriguez asked. Vasquez smiled slightly. I was transferred to a different unit. My new assignment is training special operations snipers. Apparently, someone thought my unconventional methods might be useful for teaching others. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. The way you fought that night. I've never seen anything like it. How did you manage to protect multiple teams across miles of terrain? Growing up hunting in Colorado mountains, Vasquez replied. My father taught me to read terrain and weather like other people read books. In special operations, you learn to make impossible shots because soldiers' lives depend on it. That evening, Rodriguez gathered his entire team to meet the woman who had saved their lives. When Elena Vasquez walked into the room, these elite warriors, men who had seen combat all over the world, stood and applauded. Morrison stepped forward and spoke for all of them. Staff Sergeant, there aren't words to thank you for what you did. You didn't just save our lives, you brought our captain home. Vasquez looked at each of the men she had protected that stormy night. In special operations, we never leave anyone behind. That night, you were my brothers in arms, even though we'd never met. Rodriguez would later write in his official report that the mission succeeded because of exceptional support from Allied forces. He never mentioned that the Allied force was one woman with a sniper rifle who had fought an entire Taliban unit to protect soldiers she'd never met. Elena Vasquez became a legend among special operations forces, though few knew her real name. She was known simply as the Angel, the mysterious sniper who appeared in impossible situations to protect American soldiers. Years later, when recruits asked about the most important lesson in special operations, veterans would tell them the story of the night when the SEALs murmured that their captain was gone, until the legendary female sniper emerged from the storm to bring everyone home.